Friday, November 22nd, 1963, dawned like any other day. The big news in Cincinnati, the weekend grand opening of I-75 and the Brent Spence Bridge. If you happen to be listening to the radio, you might have heard that President John F. Kennedy was heading to Dallas for a meeting with Texas business leaders. But he would end up instead having a meeting with fate.
We just have a report from our correspondent, Dan Rather, in Dallas, that he has confirmed that President Kennedy is dead. That President Kennedy is dead.
I think everybody who was, living and old enough to be cognizant of the thing will never forget where they were.
Rebecca Wagner of Fort Thomas remembers too clearly.
I remember going up to get the kids out of after their nap, and I was crying. I think everybody was crying at that time.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Rebecca Wagner took it especially hard. That's because 3 years earlier, President Kennedy had come to her house on Park Avenue in Newport on a campaign swing through Cincinnati. JFK sat with her mother on their front porch, then came inside where he shook her hand, touched this glass.
This is the glass. It's been dusted out, wiped out, but it has never been washed since John Kennedy drank a Pepsi-Cola from it.
And touched her heart forever.
The assassination also had a shattering impact at Cincinnati's U.S. Attorney's Office, which at the time was located here inside the federal courthouse building. The young U.S. Attorney at the time had been a Kennedy campaign worker. When you heard the president had been shot, what went through your mind at that moment?
Well, it was just as being disoriented, like it's not happening.
Tom Lukin was that young attorney.
The only thing I can remember is in almost being disoriented and running to the window and looking out at the square, particularly at the spot where he had been just a year before. He'd been on the square when he gave a speech and had about 20,000 people, and everybody joked at the way he pronounced Cincinnati as Cincinnati.
Cincinnati has voted. Listen, it's called Cincinnati in Boston, and it's going to be called Cincinnati. We're going to explain to you how to pronounce it.
City Councilman Tyrone Yates couldn't go to the rally. He was too young. But JFK's death had a lasting impact on Yates, who now has a home filled with Kennedy books and photos, and who made Kennedy a model for his own life.
Did John Kennedy inspire you to become what you've now become?
Well, in the main, I think John Kennedy, and still when I see his films, it still inspires me to want to stay involved in public life and not to take what he would have described a more selfish path.
JFK was also very special to Stephen Birmingham. The Cincinnati author, who was a young man, knew Jackie Kennedy and who later wrote her biography. Birmingham recalls how an exciting, hopeful period in history was suddenly shattered.
Well, I remember being in Washington while Kennedy was president, and there was such a feeling of gaiety and fun. It did seem like Camelot. It just was a glamorous moment that seemed to be suddenly cut off.
Ignition, liftoff.
But much more was lost that day. Ohio astronaut John Glenn, a national hero, says Kennedy not only inspired him to greatness, but it lifted the American spirit as well.
He was trying to call the best out of people, not just what your country does for you, but what you can do for your country and things like that. And the Peace Corps, and there was sort of a vibrancy and aliveness.
Now we can only wonder what might have been had the dream not been cut short 30 years ago. John Matarese, Channel 9 News.